He bought a one-way early morning ticket to Ottawa. Little did he know that he opened a pathway that will erase every suspicion. It was Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2002, a day normally reserved for affection, for love notes and dinner plans. But in one Calgary home, plans evaporated without warning. Adrienne McColl, a young woman balancing grief and hope, vanished from her downtown bistro that evening. Her life, so full of promises, vanished as well. The clock kept ticking. She never showed up for that shift. She missed dinner plans. By dawn, questions multiplied, but answers stayed silent. Have you or someone you know ever disappeared without explanation? How would that feel in your world? Next morning, February 15th, Stephen Parent, Adrienne's boyfriend, disappeared too. Simultaneously, her stepfather's car, key to the investigation, vanished. Investigators found that car abandoned at Calgary International Airport. Inside, Adrienne's shoes lay in the trunk. And 2 stalls away, Parent's jeans, stained with blood on the pant leg. In forensic terms, these are not just clues. They're screams for answers. But, critically, they screamed into silence. How do you make sense of that? Shoes in a car at the airport? Blood where you'd never expect it. It's a puzzle with pieces missing. 2 days later, February 17th, 2002, a rancher discovered Adrienne's body in a field 85 kilometers outside Calgary. She was gone from the world, but not from memory. She was found without shoes, without coat, without pants. She had been strangled and beaten. Violent, personal, close, and tragically final. Silence, then horror. Suspicion, then heartbreak. Calgary's heart cracked open. Now, the strange details began to surface. No coat, no pants, no shoes. How did she get out there? The city had vanished from her. Where did Adrienne go after February 14th? What was the last moment she remembers? Her silence became investigators' hell. Meanwhile, Stephen, you guessed, flew out. A one-way ticket to Ottawa, bought at 10:06 a.m., just hours after Adrienne was last seen. Their connection? Gone. His disappearance made him the only person of interest. But still, not enough for charges. Imagine you're the investigator. 1 lead, 2 lives, no motive, no confession, no smoking gun. And then, investigators came face to face with something they didn't expect at all. What do you think police found that didn't match expectations? A different suspect? Unexpected alibi? Something else entirely? Between 2002 to 2005, the investigation began almost immediately. Calgary police zeroing in on the people closest to Adrienne. Stephen Parent, her boyfriend, was first the missing person, then a key suspect. He'd booked a one-way flight to Ottawa just hours after a body was discovered. Investigators questioned him. They listened to his alibi. They watched how he slipped away from the city. But had they ever seen the real Stephen, or just a man unraveling? The media pounced. Headlines raced. Boyfriend vanishes, suspect flees. Calgary communities buzzed with rumor. In bars, at work, over backyard fences, everyone had an opinion. Fear spread. People whispered. Had you ever walked by that field? Had you noticed something unusual in the days before? The city felt tight, watched. And yet, nothing concrete emerged. Detectives chased information. Friend accounts, sightings, phone logs. But memories faded. Witnesses couldn't recall faces clearly. Stories conflicted. Hot leads went cold, and with them hope. Adding to the frustration, critical evidence records went missing. Files mislabeled. Reports unretrievable. It was as if the trail itself dissolved. Detective interviews did little to break ground. A waitress recalled seeing Adrienne the night she vanished, but couldn't say what she wore. A co-worker remembered hearing raised voices, but couldn't place who spoke. Investigators watched their leads evaporate. Nights turned into weeks, into months, into years. The case slipped away from headlines, from public memory, from the minds of everyone involved. Then, silence. The file sat under lock and key in cold case storage. The case was officially cold, a haunting phrase that means not closed but suspended. Every unanswered question stretched longer. In the quiet of their offices, detectives left coffee cold, lights dimmed on empty desks. But in dreamscape and doubt, the unresolved knife of guilt and grief remained unsheathed. If you were an investigator back then, who would you have looked at first? The boyfriend? Someone we'll never know? What makes someone more suspicious? Absence, behavior, emotion? Let us know below. Years passed. Adrienne's case gathered dust in cold case files, filed away, but never forgotten. But the silence of the 2000s gave way to a new decade, the 2010s. And with it, a quiet revolution in criminal investigation. This wasn't the same Calgary police force anymore. This was an era where science could breathe life into evidence once thought dead. Every detective who had touched Adrienne's case still remembered her face, her story. For them, this wasn't just another file. It was a wound that had never healed. And now, technology offered a chance, however slim, to reopen that wound in search of truth. DNA analysis had advanced by leaps and bounds. In 2002, tests required larger, cleaner samples. A single mistake could erase a chance forever. By 2010, science had changed the rules. Trace DNA, once invisible, could now be magnified into evidence. Fingerprints long considered smudged or inconclusive could now be digitized, enhanced, and run against modern databases. Even archived files could be scanned and cataloged with precision never imagined in the early 2000s. Nobody had to say it aloud, but detectives knew. If they revisited Adrienne's case, they might finally find a crack in the wall. And so, the Calgary Cold Case Unit pulled Adrienne's evidence box from storage. Inside, reports yellowed with time, photos fading at the edges, fibers, swabs, sealed envelopes. Some items had never been retested, simply because technology hadn't been there yet. Now it was what once looked ordinary, now looked extraordinary. In 2018, new DNA techniques were applied to evidence taken from Adrienne's body and belongings. Analysts looked closer, deeper. The samples told a story the witnesses never could. They pointed, unmistakably, to the man Adrienne once trusted most, Stephen Parent, the boyfriend who disappeared, the man who boarded that one-way flight to Ottawa. His DNA whispered from the grave, and science had finally caught up to him. But DNA wasn't the only tool. Detectives began re-interviewing old witnesses. Memories, though faded, sparked under new questions. Someone recalled the tension between Adrienne and Stephen in the weeks before her death. Another spoke of inconsistencies in his story, small, subtle contradictions that once seemed irrelevant, but now screamed significance. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was convergence, multiple threads of science and testimony weaving into one undeniable picture. For investigators who had lived with this case for nearly 2 decades, the moment was bittersweet. Relief mixed with frustration. Why had it taken so long? Could Adrienne's family have found closure earlier if technology had existed in 2002? The answers weren't comforting, but the path forward was clear. For the first time in 20 years, the case was alive again. And then, just when it seemed like the evidence couldn't go further, one tiny piece changed everything. A microscopic sample, overlooked in 2002, now told a story no one had heard before. For more than 2 decades, the case seemed to be slipping into the shadows of history. Families grieved, detectives retired, and files grew dusty. But in 2022, everything changed. A DNA breakthrough finally gave investigators the key they had been searching for since 2002. Forensic specialists re-examined the smallest traces collected at the crime scene, microscopic evidence that, at the time, couldn't be fully analyzed. Now, with modern technology, those fragments told a story, and that story pointed directly to a man who had been hiding in plain sight. When authorities announced they had identified a suspect, the city of Calgary held its breath. Police launched a quiet but intense operation, tracking the man's movements, conducting surveillance, and building a timeline that connected him to the night of the crime. Behind the scenes, detectives prepared for the moment that had eluded them for over 20 years. Then came the arrest. In 2018, Parent was arrested in Quebec and charged with second-degree murder. Officers closed in, and a man who thought he had escaped justice for decades was suddenly in handcuffs. The revelation stunned the community. For neighbors and acquaintances, he was an ordinary figure, blending into everyday life. But investigators uncovered a hidden history, contradictions between the person people thought they knew and the secrets he had carried for so long. The emotional impact was immediate. For the victim's family, it was a moment of relief, disbelief, and heartbreak all at once. Relief that the search was finally over. Disbelief that the killer had been walking free for so many years. And heartbreak at the reminder of the life stolen back in 2002. The city of Calgary watched closely as mugshots were released, courtroom sketches appeared on screens, and police held press conferences detailing the breakthrough. It was a story of patience, persistence, and the remarkable power of forensic science to give voices back to the silenced. After a lifetime trapped in uncertainty, justice finally had a day in court. The courtroom hummed with quiet tension. Every witness, every lawyer, every reporter felt the weight of 2 decades tied to a single sentence. The trial began, not just for a crime, but for the memory of a life taken too soon. Inside those hearing rooms, prosecutors presented the forensic technology, the retested DNA, the voice from 20 years ago speaking through science. Witnesses were called, some re-interviewed with regret, others huddled in silence, offering context, observation, heartbreak. Evidence was laid bare. Microscopic DNA matched to the suspect, correspondence between earlier statements and updated findings. Each fact deliberate, each fragment painstakingly arranged. Witnesses took the stand. Co-workers, friends, the quiet people who remembered bits and pieces. An argument that with modern science, no memory was too small to matter. In October 2021, after deliberating for just 2 hours, a jury convicted Parent following a 2-week trial. In his closing arguments to jurors, Prosecutor Shane Parker said the murder was motivated by rage. Parent's fingerprint was found on one of the plastic garbage bags that was discarded along with McColl's body. As the details unfolded, each piece of the case fit into a mosaic of truth too vivid to ignore. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. The court clerk's voice echoed, "Guilty." The suspect, once hidden in the crowd, sat motionless. The judge spoke gravely. He would serve 17 years before eligibility for parole, a sentence upheld by the province's top court. Adrienne McColl, 21, was beaten and strangled on Valentine's Day, 2002. That number, 17, was more than a sentence. It was a public promise. Crime may hide in the shadows, but time and truth will always find it. The courtroom's air trembled. Adrienne's family, faces lined with grief and fatigue, looked on. Relief washed over them, mixed with the old pain that never truly fades. Tears were shared with quiet hugs, a sob or two that felt like decades of waiting finally escaping. The judge's gavel didn't just mark a conclusion. It echoed through their grief, a bittersweet milestone in a journey marred by loss. As news spread through Calgary, public reaction mirrored the complexity of the case. Some felt vindicated, a community's faith in justice restored. Others couldn't shake the question, why did it take over 20 years? Conversations emerged around kitchen tables, in the press, across social media, about the power of forensic science, the resilience of families, and the value of persistent investigation. In a city that had carried this pain quietly, justice's echo now resonated openly, stirring hope and healing, even if slow and never complete. Do you think the suspect's sentence reflected justice served or justice delayed? What does it mean for victims' families when the case takes decades to resolve? Share your thoughts. As the courtroom doors finally closed on this decades-long investigation, Calgary itself seemed to exhale. For over 20 years, the shadow of this crime lingered, not just over one family, but over an entire city. Advances in DNA technology, paired with persistent detective work, proved that even time itself could not erase the truth. For law enforcement, this wasn't just another case closed. It was a reminder that no file is ever truly forgotten, and that every unsolved crime still carries a voice waiting to be heard. But beyond the investigative triumph, there was the legacy of the victim. Friends and family members spoke of her kindness, her laughter, her quiet presence that left a lasting mark on those who knew her. For them, this was not a headline, not a case number. This was a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone whose life mattered, and whose absence has been felt every single day since 2002. Tap that like button, subscribe now, and never miss a story.